Today, I'd like to start making some videos about the game For Honor, a unique take on a fighting game that encapsulates some of its concepts into something that works in a full 3D game context that hasn't really been captured anywhere else. And to that, I'd like to start making a series of retrospectives with a little bit of a guide and tier placement talk, starting with the Gryphon. The Gryphon comes from a pretty dire era of For Honor's post-launch development, the Year 4 to Year 5 drought upon which the pandemic forced the team to make some rather anemic budget decisions in regards to the game's new content. Noticeably, all three heroes from this period until the launch of the Outlanders take assets and concepts from elsewhere in the game that could be reused, even some of the story mode assets. While the Gryphon is a character from the story, the Lawbringer known as Holden Cross, he instead reuses assets from animations used by the other characters in the game as a whole, justified as the Gryphon having become this very worldly mercenary who went and learned a bit of everyone's styles and cultures. Over the years, I have grown a bit of an appreciation for these characters who are effectively composites of everyone's best moves in the game. The only downside of that being that most of them have rather rubbish designs. There's Seth from Street Fighter, who is he's a big grey, he's a big neutral colour guy. There's Droll from Virtua Fighter, who is a shiny woman. And there's Double, who is, while impressively animated, is just a honking blob of metamorphizing mass to justify turning into different characters to reuse the sprites. Honestly, I grew a second appreciation for, of all characters, Honoka from Dead or Alive, when I figured out that she had what were effectively Taskmaster powers. Suddenly, new level of respect. So while I could just show you all the animations that were reused, first we must get into how this reflects on the story concept of the Gryphon. If you know a little bit about For Honor, you might at least know that all the fighters speak different languages based on which faction they're from. To reinforce the Gryphon's identity as a sort of combat anthropologist, he has actually been able to learn all 4 languages learned by the 4 main factions, including the Wulin, who speak Mandarin. According to the translations video, a comment underneath by the guy's actual voice actor, this was no small feat, having to receive voice coaching from 4 different voice coaches for each of the unique languages. And this was supposed to be a budget character, by the way. While some lines are specific languages based on the move and which character it is specifically a reference to, it can also change depending on his target. If he's fighting a knight, he'll speak more Latin. If he's fighting a samurai, he'll prioritize Japanese lines, and so on and so forth. While I've not been keeping up with any story that isn't in the story mode, from what I understand, the Gryphon has become the basis for the multiplayer's new conflict between Horkos and the Chimera. The Gryphon himself has become a pillar of the game's message of what seems to be progressive conservatism, preserving old traditions and cultures without rejecting new or foreign ideas. Ask Archivist Eris about this one. It's just what I hear. So he copies everyone's styles in order to reuse their animations. How does this factor into his gameplay exactly? Well, not really. For as exciting as the Gryphon's concept is, its execution isn't really particularly impressive. Starting from the top, the Gryphon has 3 hit strings, which makes him feel a bit more old school, as some of the older characters used to have that. Perhaps the only unique thing about this is the way it's kind of annotated. This bizarre method of notating the strings is only done for this character and no one else. Most characters, whether they have 2 or 3 hit strings, will usually list every possible combination of the heavies and lights. All this really means for Gryphon is that it's more clear when certain moves skip ahead to his chain or finisher attacks. But until he gets to those finishers, none of his moves have any particularly special properties. The only thing he does have, starting from neutral, is he'll have the double same side lights. While there are a bunch of characters that have this now, I like to think that this is a joint reference to Warden's side lights and the then only top lights Orochi used to have, even though the animation is the heavy to light hilt bash that the Lawbringer has now. The moves in general are pretty average except for their size. The heavy swing pretty wide, and the lights are only 500 ms, so not particularly fast speed. The chains are kind of useless. They're pretty much just in the way of you getting to your finishers, and don't have any special properties besides an increase in damage. The main benefit of the double same-side light seems to be just that you skip right ahead to your finishing move. Gryphon's finishing moves are where his actual mix comes in. If you've played against the Gryphon at all, you probably know this one. Everyone likes to start with that. When he gets to his finisher, the Gryphon can do 3 major options. He can do the kick, which guarantees a heavy, for 24 damage. He can do the heavy outright, which makes it armoured. Or he can do an undodgeable light, which will catch attempts to dodge. You can also technically get more options by doing the heavy and then hard feinting it into whatever else you want to do after that. You can also hard feint the heavy as a method of catching dodge attacks. And that's pretty much it. The Gryphon has just enough to have whatever he needs for most situations, and then kind of nothing else. The guy has very uninteresting offense, pretty much because, as far as I can tell, they intended all of his unique features to be on his 4v4 feats. But before I move on to anything else, I might as well show you what else he has. He does have a dodge bash, and that guarantees a light as always, and he has dodge and dash attacks. Interesting to note is what I said earlier about some of the moves skipping phases in his chain combos. Dodge and dash attacks will skip right ahead straight to his finisher after you land them. This also affects his guard break and his throw. Guard breaking someone counts as your starter, so your next hit will be a chain. This also means his wall punish is technically stronger than his normal guard break punish, but for a different reason than it would be for other characters. Usually when this is the case, the hero has a heavy that deals more damage but is slower, and so you can't guarantee it off of a guard break, but they can guarantee it if they push him to the wall first. Gryphon technically achieves this, but only because throwing someone to the wall skips you straight to your finisher. This does massive damage compared to most other guard break options in the game. His top heavy specifically is slightly more damage than his side heavy, but only in this case, presumably because the side heavy swings so wide. I like when heroes in For Honor have wall punishes stronger than their regular guard break punishes. It encourages adapting to your surroundings to make the most of openings without being something as silly as a stage hazard, and the sequence is often long enough to feel like you're doing a cool combo, which is rare in this game. With so many ways to skip them, Gryphon's chain attacks being bad isn't really that much of an issue, except for one circumstance: getting light parries. Parrying a light opens up your opponent long enough for you to be able to do a 24 damage heavy, but unlike when you open with a light, you won't be able to skip straight to your finisher, the actually threatening part of your kit. You have to make another attack in order to actually start your mix-up. He also has his own attack. It's fine. It's got a nice radius to it, and it's not that slow to start up, but there's no unique utility to it like some characters may have. So generally, this character needs to play on the defensive in order to actually get his offense going, since none of his openers have any unique utility. But before we move on to the feat stuff, I might as well show you around the stuff the animations stolen from the other characters, and just kind of look at them and go, yeah, that's neat. His choice of zone attack is the Jiangjun zone. Which, yeah, that's cute. If I had to pick any zone attack in the game to steal, I'd choose that one. His dash light is the Kensei Helm Splitter. His dash heavy seems to be a version of Kensei's dash heavy also, just one where he doesn't leave the ground. He has a couple of animations he kept from being a Lawbringer too. Obviously the shove. the top right tap and the pommel bashes. His top finishing heavy and his little kick are from Highlander. One of the biggest reasons for Gryphon's very simple offense is possibly due to the fact that he was basically designed to play around his 4v4 feats, with his basic kick basically acting as a bare minimum viable way in order to keep himself together. While other characters in the game do have healing feats, Gryphon has access to 3 separate tiers with healing feats in them as his unique ones. None of them are amazingly potent, but they are strong enough to swing a health difference in your favour, and both his tier 3 and tier 4 act as simultaneous offense feats as well. However, that does mean, in pure 1v1s, that Gryphon isn't a particularly unique character that can't be outdone by any other character in the game. He's good enough, but if you wanted a particular part of his offense, you could probably find that done stronger by the character he borrowed it from. Normally I suggest using your light finishers first against any enemy you fight for the first time. Most people will be expecting the kick after all, it's the most notorious part of its offense. But there is a bit of a problem with undodgeable finishers. When done from the sides, undodgeable finishers can be option selected by deflects and superior guard blocks on dodge. This means you have to have them come from the top in order to prevent this, and thus the direction becomes predictable. Normally I wouldn't consider it worth talking about his executions, but Gryphon I think has a lot of potential to represent his multiculturalism through his executions, but he doesn't really do that. But of course, there is one I can talk about. One of his base executions is perhaps the best in the game. When the opponent gets stuck with the blade, that's when they die for real. That is one of his base executes, and it's one of the fastest in the game, perhaps even competing with the fastest generic in the game. Execution healing does scale with duration, but Gryphon has access to a gear perk that grants bonus flat healing with every kill, executed or otherwise. In combination with this, the amount is actually pretty good. If I had to guess, that is probably the highest value for time spent doing the execution over healing gained. Also, the sound design and minion clearing on this guy are just so satisfying. This is just terrific. While I think more could have been done with Gryphon's journeyman every style approach to give him a more unique presence in 1v1s, I think it was a conscious decision to make him more basic so that he would come across as a wise, fundamental based character, in keeping with his age and personality. His 4v4 feats are strong enough to hold up his tier presence by themselves, especially in the long form breach mode where even basic healing has to be fought for, and his basic nature doesn't make him bad in duels, just outclassed. They also likely gave him a healer focus as a strong contrast to the Warmonger's destructive contagion feats that deal tons of damage to large groups. I'd certainly want to main him if he had a more specialised dueling kit though. He represents a positive view of the world that I vibe with, and it's an icon for how For Honor brings all these different historical cultures together into a game like this. Preservation without rejection. Thank you for your time.